Hi, everyone. It is Monday, the day before the midterm elections, and we have been having conversations that we hope will be helpful to you as you go to vote if you haven't voted already. Hi, everyone. I know 2:30 on a Monday afternoon. Not sure if anybody's around, but we've been having these conversations to try to help illuminate some of the issues of the midterm elections. And we wanted to talk about the economy because so many people are talking about inflation, they're talking about gas prices, they're talking about grocery prices, and that's really inspiring them to vote in some cases. And many people do, in fact, through the years, vote with their pocketbooks. So I know we've been talking about the potential of a recession, and so we wanted to get an economist to really explain sort of who's responsible for the economy. Is Joe Biden doing things that he could be doing differently? And here, hold on, Carrie, you can get it. Just come and get it. That's all right, no worries. My daughter just needed a tote bag. Anyway, so we've got somebody coming in who is Jason Furman. He's an economist. He was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for President Obama's second term, and he should be joining us. He's currently a professor at Harvard Kennedy School. He definitely knows his stuff. Fun fact, too, you guys, he was Matt Damon's roommate. He was his roommate freshman year at Harvard, and I think there he is, Jason Furman. Yeah. Yes, that's him. Professor Furman is available and in the building to kind of, this is not going to be super long, you guys, but for people who want to be informed about the economy. Hey, how are you?
Good. Sorry to not be here.
Don't worry, don't worry. Thank you for joining us. So I was just saying you were Matt Damon's roommate your freshman year at Harvard.
Yeah, I saw him over the weekend. We talked a little bit about inflation, but mostly more interesting topics.
Yeah. I bet you've dined out on that, Jason, for a few years, huh? So let's talk. So let's talk about the economy, because 80% of voters say the economy is a top issue for them in the midterms. So how are you seeing the economy at this moment in time before we talk about who might be responsible for the state of the economy?
Yeah, the economy right now is a strange thing. There's one way in which it's really, really good. The unemployment rate is about as low as it's been in 50 years. We're continuing to add a lot of jobs. In another way, though, the economy is really bad, which is that the inflation rate is incredibly high. And you need to keep both of these facts in your mind. Right now, I'd say more people are dissatisfied because they don't like the inflation than they are satisfied. But, you know, it's a weird combination of good and bad.
You know, it's interesting because I think somebody actually just wrote grocery prices are insane. I think someone else said $315. I mean, when they go to the grocery store, and this is something that I think people face every day, and they think, yeah, I'm going to turn the comments off maybe. Let's just see if we get some interesting comments and some questions for Jason before I totally give up on everyone. But, you know, tell me about where we are. I know that Robert Reich posted something about, hey, if the inflation is at a 40-year high, you should mention corporate profits are at a 70% high. Of course, that's a very Robert Reich thing to say. But what do you think? Give us some perspective about where we are right now economically compared to, say, the last 20 years.
Where we are is the unemployment rate is about as low as it's been. So, you know, people who want jobs have jobs. That's not always the case. That is the case right now. In fact, there are about 2 job openings out there for every unemployed person. So there really are jobs. But the inflation rate is the highest it's been in 40 years. Things are going up in price by about 8% every year. I think very little of that is actually corporate profit. The biggest factor is just demand is incredibly high. People have a lot of money. They can afford to buy a lot of stuff, and the economy can only make so much stuff. And that's when you get inflation. The Federal Reserve is in charge of stabilizing inflation. They got started to it late, and I think they're going to succeed eventually, but they're certainly not going to succeed by tomorrow.
Well, let's talk about, my mom used to say the president doesn't make the economy makes the president.
A
And
very wise woman.
I'm just curious, a lot of people obviously are blaming the Biden administration. They feel that the economy, that it's not working for them. So can you talk about the factors that create the environment we're in right now? And if anyone or anything singularly is to blame?
Yeah, it's a lot of different factors, but a bunch of them have nothing to do with the president's control. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is not the only factor in inflation, but it's added a bunch to it, and especially gasoline prices. A lot of that is Russia's a major oil exporter. Europe is no longer buying oil from Russia. A lot of other shipping has been disrupted. And so oil prices are higher, and so gasoline prices are higher. That's just bad luck. A lot of food prices, same thing. A lot of grain comes out of Ukraine. Russia isn't letting that grain out of Ukraine. But it's not the only factor. We gave families big checks in 2020 and 2021. And when they spent that money, that drove up prices. The Fed kept interest rates really low, which was fun while it lasted. But, that also, drove up inflation.
Could the Biden administration have urged the Fed to take action sooner, Jason, or is it a completely independent entity that makes its own decisions? Because I do think there's a feeling like, why didn't they see this coming? Why didn't they take steps that would reduce inflation? And by the way, I'm not very smart when it comes to economic issues. I'm just putting that out there, everyone. Go ahead, Jason.
You sound terrific to me. Yeah, the Fed is the main body charged with forecasting inflation and doing stuff about it by raising and lowering interest rates, and they completely missed it. It would have been inappropriate for the president to tell them how to do their job. The Fed really needs to figure that out, do it on their own. Presidents, when they try to tell the Fed what to do, it can create all sorts of chaos. So I don't think it was the president's fault that they made a mistake. He appointed people there. He appointed good people. In fact, he reappointed Jay Powell, who was a Republican, who was originally appointed by President Trump.
Could Joe Biden and his team have done anything, Jason, that would have changed where we are in terms of the economy?
Look, I think sending the checks they did in 2021 was a mistake.
Why, you think it was too much?
I think it was too much. I think the first round of checks in 2020 made sense. I think maybe some additional money made sense. I'm glad they did something to help rescue the economy. But when you do too much, people have too much money to spend and you can't make enough. And so that drives up prices. After that, I think they've done a pretty good job. They've helped to reopen the ports and get our logistics and trucking system running. They have the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't think it'll make a big difference, but it's cutting the deficit, and that'll help a little bit as well. So I think they've done some things to help, but they just don't have a lot of large tools. I mean, I want to go back to what your mother said. Presidents don't make the economy makes presidents, and that's a lot of what's going on here.
So you think supply side issues that were really, affecting the economy during COVID, those things are being ironed out. What about gas prices? I know you're kind of giving a macroeconomics lesson here, but gas prices are connected to the war in Ukraine. And tell us when we might find relief. I know President Biden has been tweeting out that their prices are going down. But can you just talk about that and why gas prices have fluctuated so wildly over the past number of months?
Yeah, there's two big issues. One is what's the global price of oil, and a lot of that has to do with decisions taken overseas. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then more recently, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the other big oil producers agreed they would produce less. And when you produce less, that drives the price up. The other thing is refinery capacity. You can't take oil and put it in your car. You have to put oil through a really, really big, expensive, complicated factory called a refinery, and you put the oil in, and out comes gasoline. And those refineries, we just haven't built any in a really long time in the United States, and they've been really stretched. So we've had a hard time making gasoline out of oil. And so the
Well,
price of gasoline has been even higher than you'd expect given the oil price.
why haven't we made more refineries? That seems sort of nutty.
And people have been using less gasoline each year than the last, switching to electric cars or cars getting more efficient. It's also often really hard to get a permit to build a refinery. It smells up the whole neighborhood. No one wants to have one next to them. Some of it might be fears that the president was going to be cutting out, trying to sort of cut out fossil fuels over time. So why make a big refinery today if 10 years from now you can't use it? But this refinery capacity has been a big, real issue in gasoline prices.
You opposed Joe Biden canceling student debt, and you likened it to pouring roughly $500 billion of gas on the inflationary fire that's already burning. Was that a mistake in terms of what we were dealing with now? It certainly sounds like you believe it was.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was passionate in that particular moment. I definitely think it's a negative. I definitely think it's going to add to inflation. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. It was just the worst thing that morning. But yeah, there is a student loan debt problem in this country. We need a comprehensive solution, but a lot of people getting that relief are doctors and lawyers and people that went to business school, and giving them money that they go out and spend is just going to add to inflation. And I think now is the wrong time for that. We need a different, much more targeted solution to the problem.
Is there, well, what would the solution be? If you were in charge, Jason, what would you recommend be done to lessen some of these issues that are, causing so many Americans to struggle?
Yeah, so the first thing is making college more affordable with more grants that you get up front when you go to college. The second is shifting to a system, and the president is partly doing this, where if you end up doing badly, you don't have to pay back your student loans, and they automatically get forgiven. And the third is we actually need more regulation of some of the schools that charge people a ton of money, graduate them into situations where they don't get great jobs, and they end up defaulting on their debt. And the problem is the money goes to the university, and then it comes from the government. And so maybe giving universities some skin in the game. If a lot of your students default, maybe you should have to pay some of the cost of that default, not just the students and the government being left holding the bag.
What about overall things that you might do for the economy to stabilize it and to prevent, say, a recession? Are there things that could be done right now by the Biden administration that it isn't doing, just in terms of economic policy in general?
Look, I mean, the Biden administration is doing a lot of what it should. It just can't pass things through Congress. So first, there's do no harm. The debt limit is going to come up again next year. That's a limit on how much the U.S. can borrow. And we're pretty much the only country in the world that has something like that. If you go over the debt limit, the government would default. Ronald Reagan said it would be a cataclysm of, unprecedented proportions. So, Republicans should stop threatening to hold Congress hostage, and maybe Democrats should take advantage of the lame duck to raise the debt limit. So there's not doing harm, and then there's doing some good things. I think cutting the budget deficit right now would actually help control inflation. You could do it with a combination of raising revenue and cutting spending. You could debate the exact format that would take. But I think that would be a way that the president and Congress could help on inflation.
I think for whatever reason, many voters feel Republicans are better on economic issues than Democrats are. I think that's been a sense that sort of has been prevalent, Jason, ever since I've been covering sort of politics and these issues. Have you heard anything from Republican candidates that would lead you to believe that they have measures, proposed measures that could really change our economic situation? Or is it simply cyclical and there's very little we can do about it?
What's striking on the Republican side is there's just this huge contrast between their criticism of the economy and inflation and their solutions. They have a lot of criticism of inflation being too high, and that's common. If you're the opposition party, you complain about anything that goes wrong. They don't have any solutions for high inflation. You can look through the whole Republican platform and it wouldn't help inflation. In fact, a bunch of it is tax cuts that would actually probably hurt inflation and make it even worse. So on the central criticism and problem they've identified, I don't think they have an answer.
Some of my followers ask, could the rise in interest rates help without a recession? Is it all doom and gloom?
It's possible. There's something called the soft landing, which is inflation comes down without the unemployment rate going up very much. And those have happened before. I think it's possible. Unfortunately, it just hasn't happened that much. And almost every time we've seen inflation come down a lot, it's been because of a recession. Now, the hope is a lot of unprecedented things are happening now. And so maybe the Fed can figure out how to land this plane without a recession. I certainly think that's possible, but I just don't know if it's going to happen or not.
Someone's asking, how long do you estimate it will take for the economy to correct itself?
That's a great question. In the past, when we've battled inflation like this, it has taken a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years of dealing with it. This inflation came so much more quickly and is somewhat less embedded in the economy and in expectations that we may be able to solve it more quickly, maybe in 1 to 2 years. But it's not going to happen, certainly overnight by the time of the midterm elections. Maybe by the time of the 2024 election, it's on its way to being fixed.
So Sandy Thompson asks, and then we'll let you go. So to make it simple, price of groceries as an example, is it because it costs more money for gas to transport and to pay employees more salaries, so the costs are passed down to the consumer? Not sure I understand the supply demand part. People have money, so the price of lettuce, milk go up. Do you want to take a stab at that, Jason?
Yeah, so first of all, part of it is this gasoline. I mean, gasoline is a part of every stage of the food process. It's part of how you make fertilizer. It's part of how you transport the food. It's part of where you get the food from, etc. But how does demand translate to lettuce? You give people more checks and they buy more of things. They don't tend to buy a lot more lettuce, but they do buy more cars. They do buy more electronics, and that drives the price of those sorts of things up. The other thing is it tends to mean that you get wage increases all across the economy. You get wage increases, and when wages go up faster, right now they're going up about 5.5% a year. That usually means businesses pass that along in the form of higher prices. And so broadly speaking, if you have a labor market where there's 2 job openings for every unemployed worker, you're going to have a lot of power to raise wages, which is great. Unfortunately, the business then turns around and raises prices, which means you don't end up really any further ahead as a result.
Sounds like Sandy kind of got it right? With wages and gas prices, and it is passed down to the consumer.
Exactly.
Okay. And when you hear people who are really upset about the economy and they're voting Republican, do you understand where they're coming from? Or do you try to, talk to them about Democratic solutions versus Republican solutions? Or is it just something that's just so deeply ingrained in people?
Look, there's lots of people that have different values and perspectives. And I recognize that. And that's the whole point of a democracy, is to aggregate people's different views and different preferences. But I do try to emphasize the distinction between the problem, which I would not argue with someone on. Someone who's struggling with groceries, I'm not going to tell you you're not struggling with groceries. I think you probably are. I see it in the statistics. I myself don't love what I'm paying for gasoline. The problem, but then the solution. What would Republicans do about inflation? What would Democrats do? Would giving people a child tax credit, which the Democrats want, help families cope with the higher prices right now? Maybe it would. And so for me, yeah, it's not the problem, which does matter, but a lot of it is bad luck. It's the solution. And I do think Democrats would be better for the economy. And I'll certainly be voting that way tomorrow.
And you said you thought the Republicans were light on solutions. Are there things that they might do if they take control of Congress to address this issue? And if so, what are those steps likely to be?
Look, I mean, they might do big tax cuts, and that could actually make inflation worse, not make inflation better. Some things like, Joe Manchin had a plan to ease up permitting, make it easier to build those refineries, to transport energy. And he was actually blocked by a lot of Democrats and by the Republicans. So, could you get something that makes it easier to open up those refineries? Could you do something to ease up the permitting? I think that would be great. If that happens, it'll probably happen because of a Democratic Senator, Joe Manchin, brings along people from both political parties.
Will you have any predictions for tomorrow?
No idea, but I'm sure the Republicans will take at least one chamber, if not both. So for the next 2 years, we'll have divided government for, all the advantages and disadvantages that will bring.
What are some of the advantages?
Look, I'd rather have Democratic control of everything. I think we get overly paralyzed in the United States. But, if you are worried about really big lurches in economic policy, the U.S. system doesn't do that. And when I like the lurch, I'm sad that it's not happening. When I don't like the lurch, I enjoy the fact that our system is much slower and more cumbersome than other countries. All
right. Well, Jason Furman, thank you. I'm going to have to read up on my economic principles a little bit more, but I think that the point is that a president only has so much power over a current economic situation. And when people vote because of that, they need to really kind of consider why things are the way they are.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Well, so nice being with you, Jason. Thanks for your time.
Okay, bye.
Okay, take care. Bye, everyone.